The woman who stepped through the arched doorway of the Silverheart estate had learned long ago that people saw fabric before they saw her, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Helena Rowe carried a leather satchel filled with dictionaries in 12 languages, a tablet loaded with translation software, and enough professional credentials to justify her presence at a vampire court negotiation. What she did not carry was hope that anyone would look past the veil that covered the left side of her face, cascading down to her shoulder in layers of charcoal silk. The scars beneath had been her constant companions for 15 years, ever since the night the Church of the Purifying Flame had decided her family's bookshop was harboring supernatural texts and set it ablaze with her inside. They had been half right. Her father had indeed sold grimoires and blood treaties to vampires, werewolves, and witches alike, but Helena had been 12, asleep upstairs, and guilty of nothing except being in the wrong place when zealots arrived with torches and scripture. The scars had cost her half her face, most of her left ear, and all of her illusions about human kindness. The veil had been her compromise with a world that flinched at the sight of melted skin and twisted flesh. Behind it, she could be competent, professional, untouchable. Behind it, she could forget that she had once been called pretty. Miss Rowe. The vampire who greeted her was tall and pale as moonlight, with silver hair bound in a neat queue. His eyes were the color of old blood, and his suit was tailored with the precision that came from having centuries to perfect one's aesthetic. "I am Lucian, Seneschal to King Faelan Shadowmere. His Majesty awaits you in the treaty chamber." Helena inclined her head, the veil shifting with the movement. "Thank you. I've reviewed the preliminary documents. The covenant of coexistence is complex, but I'm confident I can provide accurate translation for both parties." "The king will be pleased to hear it." Lucian's gaze flickered to her veil, then away with the studied neutrality of someone who had seen stranger things in his long life. "The human delegation arrives tomorrow evening. Tonight is merely to ensure you understand our position before the formal negotiations begin." He led her through corridors that managed to be both modern and ancient, where electric sconces were mounted on walls that had stood for 500 years. The Silverheart estate sat on the border between the vampire territories and human lands, a neutral ground that had been consecrated by treaty magic older than the countries that now surrounded it. Beneath the elegant mansion sprawled a network of chambers and halls that descended into the earth where sunlight never reached and vampires could move freely at any hour. The treaty chamber was carved from white stone, its ceiling lost in shadows despite the chandeliers that burned with cold fire. A table of black wood stretched the length of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs upholstered in crimson, and at the head of that table sat a man who made Helena's breath catch despite herself. King Faelan Shadowmere was perhaps the most beautiful and terrible thing she had ever seen. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, framing a face that could have been carved by a sculptor obsessed with perfection and cruelty in equal measure. His skin was pale as snow, unmarked and luminous. His eyes were dark as a moonless sky, and they fixed on her the moment she entered with an intensity that made her want to step backward. He wore black, simple and elegant, with no crown or ornament to mark his rank. He needed none. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, ancient and absolute. "Miss Rowe." His voice was deep, with an accent she couldn't place, something that predated modern English and still haunted the edges of his words. "Welcome to my court." Helena curtsied, grateful for the veil that hid the way her pulse jumped in her throat. "Your Majesty, I'm honored to serve as translator for the treaty negotiations. Come closer." It wasn't a request. She moved to the table, setting down her satchel and pulling out her tablet and notebooks. "I've studied the draft covenant extensively. The primary complications will be in the sections regarding territory boundaries and the protocols for addressing crimes that cross species lines. The metaphorical language in vampire law doesn't always map cleanly onto human legal terminology, but I believe I can close her." He stood in one fluid motion, moving around the table with the uncanny grace that marked his kind. "Here, beside me." Helena's hands tightened on her tablet, but she obeyed, coming to stand at his right hand. She was tall for a woman, but he had inches on her, and she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. This close, she could see flecks of silver in the black, like stars in a night sky. He studied her face, or what he could see of it above the veil. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a creature of his power, he reached up and lifted the silk away. Helena froze, every muscle in her body locked. No one touched the veil. That was the rule. That was the one boundary that kept her safe. The scarred skin beneath was exposed to the cold firelight. The left side of her face was a landscape of melted flesh and old burns, twisting from her temple down to her jaw and disappearing beneath her collar. Her left ear was barely more than a remnant. The scars were old, healed as much as they ever would, but they were still shocking against the unmarked skin of her right side. She waited for the flinch, the polite horror, the careful replacement of the veil with some excuse about propriety. Instead, King Faelan Shadowmere looked at her scars with those ancient eyes and said, "Beautiful." The word hung in the air between them like a conjured thing. "Your Majesty?" Helena's voice came out barely above a whisper. "You are beautiful." He said it again, and there was no pity in his tone, no condescension, no careful lie meant to soothe. He stated it as simple fact, the way one might observe that the sky was dark or the stone was cold. "The fire that marked you, it was the church of the purifying flame, yes?" How did he know that? Helena swallowed hard. "Yes, 15 years ago." Something flickered across his perfect face, some shadow of old pain. They have much to answer for. But this, his fingertips cool as marble, brushed the edge of her scars with infinite care. "This is survival written in your flesh. This is proof that you are stronger than fire, stronger than their hatred. How could that be anything but beautiful?" Tears pricked at Helena's eyes, hot and sudden. No one had ever not in 15 years had anyone. "I don't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Faelan lowered his hand but didn't step back. "Forgive me. I should have asked permission before touching you. But I have lived a very long time, Helena Rowe, and I have learned to recognize what is precious when I see it. You will not hide your face in my court. There is no shame here." People stare. It came out more honestly than she'd intended. "Let them." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I am their king. If I say you are beautiful, they will learn to see with wiser eyes, or they will learn to keep their opinions silent. Either outcome is acceptable." He handed the veil back to her, and she took it with trembling fingers. But she didn't put it back on. Not yet. "Shall we discuss the treaty?" Faelan returned to his seat, gesturing for her to take the chair beside him. "I find I am very interested in your interpretation of the boundary clauses." They worked through the evening, and Helena discovered that the Vampire King was whip-smart, darkly humorous, and occasionally infuriating when he argued for interpretations that would give his people advantage. But he listened when she pushed back, and more than once she saw something like respect flicker in his eyes when she caught a nuance he'd missed. "You studied under Professor Mikhailovich?" he asked during a break, when Lucian had brought in a thermos of coffee for her and a crystal glass of something dark red for the king. "For 2 years before he retired. He's the one who taught me Old Blood script." Helena wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, grateful for its warmth. The underground chamber was cool, and she'd been here for hours. "He said I had a gift for understanding the metaphorical layers in vampire writing." He was correct. Faelan swirled the contents of his glass, watching her over its rim. "Most human translators render our words too literally. They miss the music underneath. You hear it." Language is music. She found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Every culture has its own melody. Translation is about finding the harmony between them. Poetic? His eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. "Do you always speak in metaphors, Miss Rowe? Do you always compliment people by telling them their scars are beautiful, Your Majesty?" The words were out before she could stop them, too bold, too familiar. But Faelan laughed, a sound like distant thunder, rich and genuine. Only when it's true. He set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on the table, chin resting on his folded hands. "Tell me about the fire, if you wish to. If the memory is too painful, we can speak of other things." Helena looked down at her coffee. It had been years since anyone had asked, since anyone had wanted to know rather than simply stare or whisper. I was 12," she said slowly. My father ran a bookshop that catered to supernatural clientele. He believed in neutrality, in serving anyone who came with honest coin and honest purpose. The Church of the Purifying Flame believed he was corrupting human souls by trading with your kind. They came at night. They barricaded the doors and set the building ablaze. You were inside. Asleep upstairs. My father got me out, but she touched her scarred cheek. Not before the flames found me. He died going back for the books. Some of them were irreplaceable, centuries old. He thought he could save them. I'm sorry. Faelan's voice was soft, and it carried the weight of someone who understood loss. The Church has burned much that was irreplaceable. They burn out of fear, and fear makes monsters of men more surely than any curse of blood. You've lost people to them. It wasn't a question. She could hear it in his tone. Long ago. He was quiet for a moment, and Helena sensed she was standing at the edge of an old wound, deep and still tender, despite the centuries. Someone I loved. They burned her because she stood with me, because she refused to hate what I am. The Church does not forgive that kind of love. I'm sorry. Helena set down her coffee and met his eyes. That's a wound that doesn't heal. No, he smiled, but it was sad and distant. It doesn't. But we carry them anyway, don't we? Our scars, visible and otherwise. We carry them because the alternative is to stop living entirely, and that would dishonor what we've survived. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of shared grief settling between them, like a third presence at the table. Finally, Faelan straightened. It's late and you've traveled far. Lucian will show you to your chambers. We'll continue tomorrow evening before the human delegation arrives. Helena gathered her materials and then, on impulse, she looked up at him. Thank you for what you said about my face. I spoke only truth. He stood as well, every inch the king, despite the gentleness in his voice. And Helena, you need not wear the veil in my presence, not unless you wish to for your own comfort, but not for shame, never for shame. The chambers Lucian showed her to were luxurious beyond anything she'd expected. A 4-poster bed draped in silk, a private bathroom with a tub the size of a small pool, and windows that looked out over the estate's gardens, carefully shuttered now against the night. Someone had laid out toiletries in a nightgown, and there was a tray of fruit and cheese on the side table. Helena set down her bags and moved to the mirror above the vanity. She looked at her reflection, really looked for the first time in months. The scars were still there, still shocking in their extent, but as she studied her face, she tried to see what Faelan had seen: strength, survival, beauty in the proof of endurance. It was a strange way of looking at things, but then he was a very old vampire, and perhaps he'd learned to see beauty in different terms than most. She touched her scars gently, tracing the familiar topology of melted flesh. Then she folded the veil and set it aside. She would wear it tomorrow when the human delegation arrived, but tonight, in the privacy of her chambers, she would let herself imagine what it might be like to be seen the way Faelan Shadowmere had seen her. Beautiful. The word still felt like magic. The human delegation arrived the following evening with all the pomp and paranoia that characterized modern diplomatic relations with the supernatural world. There were 5 of them, 3 lawyers, a security consultant, and a political attaché from the Department of Preternatural Affairs. They wore suits and brought briefcases and looked at the vampire court with the careful neutrality of people who expected to be eaten at any moment. Helena stood at Faelan's right hand, the veil back in place, and watched the humans assess the room. Their gazes snagged on the king, on Lucian, on the other pale-haired vampires who had assembled for the negotiations. Then their eyes found her, and she saw the moment they registered the veil, the quick calculation of what it meant. Welcome to Silverheart. Faelan's voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. I am King Faelan Shadowmere, and this is our translator, Miss Helena Rowe. Shall we begin? The negotiations were tedious, technical, and occasionally heated. The covenant of coexistence was meant to formalize the relationship between vampire territories and human governments, establishing clear protocols for everything from border crossings to criminal jurisdiction to trade agreements. It was necessary work born from decades of small conflicts and misunderstandings, but it required patience and precision. Helena translated, moving between English and Old Blood script, between human legal terminology and the more poetic phrasing of vampire law. She caught herself falling into a rhythm, her voice steady and clear, and more than once she felt Faelan's gaze on her, warm with approval. During a break, the lead human negotiator, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Aldrich, approached Helena. "You're very good," Aldrich said. "Where did you study blood script?" "University, and then privately with Professor Mikhailovich." Helena kept her voice professional, neutral. "And the veil?" Aldrich's tone was blunt. "Is it cultural, religious, or personal?" Before Helena could answer, Faelan materialized at her shoulder with the silent speed that made humans flinch. "Miss Rowe's appearance is not relevant to her qualifications as a translator," he said mildly, but there was steel underneath the courtesy. "I would ask that we keep our focus on the treaty." Aldrich had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course, my apologies." As she retreated, Helena glanced up at Faelan. "You didn't have to do that." "I am aware." His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of casual protection that shouldn't have made her heart skip. "But I choose to regardless." The negotiations continued for 3 more hours before Faelan called an end to the session. The humans filed out, escorted by Lucian to their own chambers in the estate's human-accessible wings. Helena was gathering her notes when Faelan said, "Walk with me." It wasn't a command, not quite, but she found herself nodding. He led her out of the treaty chamber and through corridors she hadn't yet explored, descending deeper into the earth. The air grew cooler, the stone older. Finally, they emerged into a garden. It shouldn't have been possible this far underground, but there it was. A vast chamber whose ceiling was lost in darkness, and growing from the floor were trees and flowers and vines, all in shades of white and silver and palest blue. They glowed with their own bioluminescence, casting gentle light across paths of pale gravel. "This is beautiful," Helena breathed. "The lightless garden?" Faelan walked beside her down a winding path, his hands clasped behind his back. "Planted 5 centuries ago by my people. We miss the sun, some of us, even after all this time. These plants give us a substitute. Not the same, but enough." Helena reached out to touch a flower that looked like a lily, its petals translucent and glowing. "Do you miss it? The sun?" "Every day." His voice was quiet. "I was turned in my 33rd year. I still remember what it felt like, warmth on my face, the way colors looked under true light. But that was a very long time ago, and one learns to find beauty in darkness as well." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the glowing garden stretching around them like a dream. "May I ask you something?" Helena glanced at him from behind her veil. "Why did you really lift this yesterday? It was more than just curiosity." Faelan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it is to hide, not behind a veil, but behind walls of duty and distance. I recognized the isolation in the way you held yourself, and I thought—" He paused, choosing his words. "I thought perhaps you were hiding not because you wanted to, but because the world had taught you that you must. I wished to offer you a different lesson. That I'm beautiful." The words still felt strange in her mouth. "That you are worthy of being seen." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Beauty is merely one word for it. There are others. Brave, resilient, fascinating. But I chose the word I did because I suspected it was the one you had been denied most often." Helena's throat tightened. "You're very perceptive for a king who spent centuries in the dark." "Centuries in the dark teach perception." His lips curved slightly. "One learns to see what is truly there, rather than what light and shadow suggest. The woman you lost." Helena wasn't sure why she said it, except that the garden felt like a place where old griefs could be spoken aloud. "The one the church burned, you loved her very much." "I did." The sadness in his voice was profound, an ocean of old sorrow. "Her name was Isadora. She was human, a scholar and a poet. She saw past what I was to who I was, and for that gift, the church branded her a heretic and a traitor to her kind. They burned her in the town square. I could not reach her in time." "How long ago?" 200 years. He He resumed walking, and Helena followed. You would think such a wound would fade with time, but grief does not work that way. It simply becomes a part of you, another layer of the person you are. Do you, Helena hesitated, do you think you'll ever love again? Faelan looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I did not think so. For 2 centuries, I believed that part of me had burned with her, but recently I have begun to wonder if perhaps I was wrong. The weight of his gaze was almost physical. Helena's pulse hammered in her throat, and she was suddenly, acutely aware of every inch of space between them. We should return, she said softly. It's late, and tomorrow will be another long session. Of course. But he didn't move immediately, and neither did she. The glowing flowers cast soft light across his perfect features, and Helena thought, not for the first time, that he was the most beautiful and dangerous thing she'd ever encountered, and he had called her beautiful in return. The thought was dizzying. Finally, Faelan stepped back, offering his arm in a gesture that belonged to an older century. Allow me to escort you to your chambers. Helena took his arm, feeling the cool strength of him beneath the fabric of his sleeve, and let him lead her back through the winding corridors of his court. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Helena spent the evenings translating for the treaty negotiations, which progressed with agonizing slowness as each clause was debated and refined. The humans were cautious, the vampires were proud, and Helena found herself navigating not just language, but culture and centuries of mutual suspicion. But the nights after the humans had retired and the vampires' true hours began, those belonged to her and Faelan. He would find her in the library or the garden or the small sitting room adjacent to her chambers, and they would talk about books and history, about the nature of immortality and the weight of mortality, about music and art and the 1,000 small beauties that made existence worthwhile. Helena found herself lowering the veil more often in his presence, until finally she stopped wearing it when they were alone together. Faelan never remarked on it, but she saw the approval in his eyes, the quiet pleasure he took in seeing her face uncovered. Tell me about your work before this, he said one night, as they sat in the library surrounded by books that predated the printing press. You've translated for other supernatural clients? Werewolf packs negotiating territory disputes, mostly. Some work for witch covens dealing with human governments. The pay is good and the work is interesting. Helena curled into the leather armchair, holding a cup of tea that Lucian had prepared with surprising skill. Though I've never worked for vampire royalty before. That's a new experience. Are we very terrifying? His tone was amused. You're terrifying in the way that deep water is terrifying, beautiful and dangerous and much older than you appear. She sipped her tea, studying him over the rim. But I'm getting used to it. I'm pleased to hear it. He was reading a book in what looked like Latin, turning pages with careful reverence. Though I confess, I find you rather terrifying as well. Helena nearly choked on her tea. I'm sorry, what? You are unafraid to challenge me when I'm wrong. You see through pretense and artifice, and you carry your scars like armor, neither hiding from them nor being defined by them. Faelan looked up from his book, his dark eyes gleaming. That's a rare strength, Helena. It unsettles me in the most intriguing way. I think that's the strangest compliment I've ever received. I'm a very old vampire. Strange compliments are something of a specialty. She laughed, and the sound echoed warmly in the quiet library. Faelan smiled in response, and Helena thought that she could get dangerously used to this, to late-night conversations and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. On the 4th night, everything changed. The treaty negotiations had reached a critical point, and tensions were high. The humans wanted stronger language around vampire feeding restrictions, while Faelan's people were pushing for greater autonomy in their territories. Helena was translating a particularly heated exchange when she noticed something odd. One of the human lawyers, a thin man named Marcus Devereaux, kept glancing at a small pin on his lapel. It was a simple design, a flame enclosed in a circle, and every time he looked at it, his fingers would twitch toward his briefcase. Helena knew that symbol. She had seen it before, branded into her nightmares and her scars, the Church of the Purifying Flame. Her blood went cold. She continued translating mechanically, but her mind was racing. The church had been outlawed in most countries after a series of terrorist attacks 15 years ago, but it had never truly died. It had gone underground, reorganized, and if the rumors were true, it had infiltrated multiple levels of government. And now, one of their members was sitting at a treaty negotiation that would formalize peace between humans and vampires. She waited until the session ended, until the humans had filed out. Then, she caught Faelan's eye and nodded toward the private antechamber. He followed her, Lucian trailing after with the silent grace of a predator sensing danger. "What is it?" Faelan's voice was low, urgent. Marcus Devereaux, the human lawyer. Helena's hands were shaking, and she gripped them together to still them. "He's wearing a pin, a flame in a circle. That's the symbol of the Church of the Purifying Flame." Lucian hissed, a sound that was barely human. "Are you certain?" "I saw that symbol burned into the walls of my father's shop." "I'm certain." Helena looked between them. If the Church has infiltrated the human delegation, this whole treaty could be a trap. Faelan's expression went cold, his eyes darkening until they were like chips of obsidian. "They seek to destabilize the peace, perhaps to provoke an incident that would justify a larger purge. We need to investigate Devereaux." Lucian was already moving toward the door, quietly. "If we accuse him without proof, it could destroy the negotiations anyway." "Do it." Faelan's voice carried absolute authority. "But carefully. I want to know who sent him and what they're planning." Lucian vanished into the shadows, and Helena was left alone with Faelan. The king was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. "They never stop," he said finally. "Century after century, they burn and kill and call it righteousness. They're afraid." Helena moved closer to him, drawn by the fury and pain radiating off him in waves. "Afraid of what they don't understand, of power they can't control. Fear makes people cruel." "Fear is no excuse." He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her step back. "They killed Isadora out of fear. They scarred you out of fear. How many more must suffer before their fear is sated?" "I don't know." Helena reached out and daringly took his hand. His skin was cool beneath her fingers, but his grip was immediately gentle, careful of her human fragility. "But we stop this one. We protect the treaty, and we expose whoever sent Devereaux. That's what we can do." Faelan looked down at their joined hands, and some of the rage drained from his expression, replaced by something softer. "You are remarkably calm for someone who has just discovered there would be killers or sitting at the negotiation table." "I'm terrified," Helena admitted. "But I've been afraid before and I survived. I'll survive this too." "You will." It was a vow. "I will see to it personally." The investigation moved quickly. Lucian discovered that Marcus Devereaux had been a last-minute addition to the human delegation, replacing another lawyer who had fallen mysteriously ill. His background was clean on the surface, but buried in his financial records were payments from shell companies linked to known church sympathizers. More troubling, Lucian found encrypted communications on Devereaux's laptop, still working their way through the estate's Wi-Fi network. The contents, once decoded, were damning. "They're planning an attack." Lucian spread the printed messages across Faelan's desk. "During the final treaty signing, they've smuggled in weapons blessed by their priests, designed to kill vampires even through modern defenses. And they're targeting you specifically, my lord." Helena read over the messages, her stomach churning. The church saw the treaty as an abomination, a validation of vampiric existence. They planned to destroy it, and Faelan, in a single dramatic strike that would ignite a war between the species. "When is the signing scheduled?" she asked. "Tomorrow night." Faelan's voice was ice. "They've been patient, waiting until the moment of our greatest vulnerability." "We cancel it." Helena looked up. "We postpone, we move it to another location, we do nothing of the sort." Faelan's eyes gleamed with cold fire. "We proceed exactly as planned, but we will be ready for them." "That's suicide. That's strategy." He moved around the desk, all predatory grace and barely leashed violence. "If we cancel or postpone, the church will simply try again, somewhere we cannot control. Better to draw them out now, on our ground, where we can end this." Helena wanted to argue, but she could see the logic. And beneath the logic, she could see the old wound, the 200-year-old grief demanding satisfaction. "You want them to come," she said quietly, "because they're the ones who killed Isadora." Faelan's jaw tightened. They are the same beast, yes, different faces, same hatred. And I have waited a very long time for the opportunity to cut out that beast's heart. Vengeance won't bring her back. No. He stepped closer, and his hand came up to cup her scarred cheek, thumb brushing gently across melted flesh. But it will ensure they never burn anyone else I love. The word hung between them, enormous and undeniable. Love. Faelan. Helena's voice broke on his name. I know it is too soon. I know I am not human, and you have every reason to fear what I am. His hand was shaking, just slightly, the only crack in his composure. But I have lived 8 centuries, Helena Rowe, and I know what love feels like. It feels like this, like finding something precious in the darkness and wanting to keep it safe at any cost. I'm not Isadora. The words came out sharper than she intended. I won't be a replacement for your ghost. You are nothing like Isadora. He said it firmly, no hesitation. She was sunlight and poetry, grace and gentleness. You are steel wrapped in silk, strength forged in fire. You are your own miracle, Helena, and I love you for yourself, not for any echo of the past. Tears burned in her eyes. This is insane. I've known you less than a week. Time is different for my kind. We do not waste it on uncertainty. His other hand came up, cradling her face between his palms. But I will not pressure you. I offer my heart freely, with no demand for yours in return. You are precious to me regardless. Helena closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. All her life she had been the scarred woman, the veiled woman, the woman people looked through or flinched away from. And now, here was this ancient, beautiful, terrifying king, holding her like she was made of starlight and calling it love. I don't know what I feel, she whispered, but it's something. Something big and frightening and new. That is enough. He pressed his forehead to hers, cool skin against warm. We will face tomorrow's threat together. And then, if you wish, we will explore this strange and frightening thing between us. Together. Together, she echoed, and let herself lean into his embrace. The next evening arrived with all the weight of a countdown. The human delegation assembled in the treaty chamber, unaware of the trap that was about to spring. Helena stood beside Faelan, her veil firmly in place, and watched Marcus Devereux with the eyes of someone who now knew what to look for. He was nervous, his gaze flicking to the chamber's entrances, to the high ceiling, to his briefcase. Whatever weapons the church had smuggled in, he was carrying them. The treaty signing was a formal affair. Each clause was read aloud in both English and blood script, with Helena translating. Representatives from both sides would add their signatures, and then Faelan and the head of the human delegation, a career diplomat named Ambassador Chen, would seal the covenant with a ritual that involved blood and spoken oaths. They were halfway through the reading when it happened. Devereux stood abruptly, his hand diving into his briefcase. "For the purity of humanity," he shouted, and pulled out a silver stake that gleamed with holy etchings. He lunged toward Faelan, but the vampire king was already moving, faster than human eyes could follow. Faelan caught Devereux's wrist mid-strike and twisted, and there was a sickening crack as bones broke. The chamber erupted into chaos. The other human delegates were shouting, security was rushing in, and Lucian appeared at Faelan's side with 3 other vampires, all of them focused on Devereux. But Helena's attention was on the shadows near the ceiling. Something was moving up there, something that glinted like metal. "Above!" she screamed, pointing. Faelan looked up just as the first crossbow bolt flew. It was aimed directly at his heart, blessed wood that would pierce even vampire flesh. Helena moved without thinking. She threw herself between Faelan and the bolt, knocking him backward with all her human strength. The bolt hit her shoulder instead, punching through fabric and flesh with brutal efficiency. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming. She heard Faelan roar, a sound of pure fury that shook the stone walls. Then she was falling, and the world went dark around the edges. When Helena swam back to consciousness, she was lying on something soft and her shoulder was screaming. She blinked, trying to focus, and found herself in what looked like a medical chamber. The ceiling was white stone, and there were modern monitors beeping nearby. "Easy." A voice she didn't recognize, female and gentle. "The bolt went clean through, but we've sealed the wound. You're going to be fine." Helena turned her head and saw a vampire woman with white hair braided down her back and kind eyes. She wore a white coat and had her hands gloved. "Where's Faelan?" Helena's voice came out raspy. "Dealing with the attackers. There were 5 church members hidden in the chamber, including Devereaux. All of them are in custody now." The vampire doctor, at least, Helena assumed she was a doctor, adjusted one of the monitors. "You saved the king's life. That bolt was blessed and aimed true. It would have killed him." The reality of what she'd done hit her like a wave. She'd thrown herself in front of a vampire king. She'd taken a weapon meant to kill him. "I need to see him." "You need to rest." "I need to see him now." Helena tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her shoulder. The doctor sighed, but helped her into a sitting position, propping pillows behind her. "He's been outside this room since we brought you in. I'll let him know you're awake." She left, and moments later Faelan entered like a storm given form. His face was tight with emotion, his eyes wild. He crossed to Helena's bedside in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman." His hands hovered over her as if he was afraid to touch her and cause more pain. "You could have died. So could you." Helena reached out with her good arm and took his hand. "I wasn't going to let that happen." "Helena." "No." She squeezed his fingers. "You said you loved me. You said you wanted to keep me safe. Well, it works both ways, Faelan. I'm not going to stand by and watch you get hurt when I can prevent it. You are human, fragile." His voice cracked. "If that bolt had been 6 inches to the right, it would have pierced your heart. I would have lost you before I ever truly had you. But you didn't lose me. I'm right here." She pulled him closer until his forehead rested against her uninjured shoulder. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." She felt him shudder, a tremor that ran through his entire body. When he spoke again, his voice was muffled against her. "I cannot do this again. I cannot watch someone I love burn or bleed because of what I am." "Then don't watch alone." Helena's free hand came up to tangle in his white hair. "Let me stand beside you. Let me choose this, choose you, with full knowledge of the danger. I'm not Isadora, Faelan. I'm not going to be a passive victim. I've survived fire before, and I'll survive whatever comes next. But I'd rather survive it with you." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You would bind yourself to a monster? You're not a monster. You're a man who's lived too long with grief and is afraid to hope again." She cupped his face, her scarred hand against his perfect cheek. "And I'm a woman who's lived too long behind a veil and is tired of hiding. Maybe we're both exactly what the other needs. I love you." He said it like a confession, like a prayer. "I love your strength and your scars and your impossible courage. I love the way you see through lies to truth. I love the sound of your laugh and the sharpness of your mind. I love you, Helena Rowe, and I will spend whatever time we have proving myself worthy of that love." "You already are." Helena leaned forward, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and kissed him. His lips were cool against hers, but the kiss was anything but cold. It was fire and longing, and 2 centuries of loneliness finally finding solace. He kissed her with infinite gentleness, as if she were made of glass, and she kissed him back with all the fierce emotion she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Faelan's eyes had gone completely black, the pupils swallowing the irises. "I want forever with you," he whispered against her lips. "I want to offer you eternity if you would have it, but I will not pressure you. The choice must be yours, freely made." Helena knew what he was offering: immortality, the blood gift that would turn her from human to vampire, that would bind her to the night and give her centuries instead of decades. "Not yet," she said softly. "Ask me again when this is over, when the treaty is sealed and the church is dealt with. Ask me when I can answer without adrenaline and fear clouding my judgment. I will wait as long as you need." He kissed her forehead, her scarred cheek, the corner of her mouth. "I am patient, and you are worth any wait." The doctor returned and shooed Faelan out so Helena could rest, but not before he promised to return within the hour. As Helena lay back against the pillows, her shoulder throbbing but her heart strangely light, she thought about forever, about what it would mean to choose the darkness, to become what she'd spent her life translating for, but never truly understanding from the inside. It terrified her, but it also thrilled her in a way nothing else ever had. She would think about it, carefully, seriously, but she already knew what her answer would be. The aftermath of the attack took 3 days to untangle. The 5 church members, including Devereaux, were interrogated by both vampire and human authorities. They revealed a network of sympathizers within multiple governments, all of them working to undermine supernatural human relations. Ambassador Chen, horrified and furious at being infiltrated, personally oversaw the purge of church sympathizers from the human delegation and issued a formal apology to Faelan on behalf of the human governments. "This is not who we are," she said during an emergency session of the negotiations. "The church represents the worst of human fear and hatred, and we will not allow them to speak for us." The treaty was renegotiated with new human representatives, carefully vetted this time. The process took another week, but finally, the covenant of coexistence was ready for signing. Helena had recovered enough to translate, though her shoulder was still healing. She stood beside Faelan in the treaty chamber, and this time, she was not wearing her veil. The decision had been hers alone. Faelan had neither asked nor pressured, but when she'd looked at the silk veil the morning of the signing, she'd realized she didn't want it anymore. She was tired of hiding, tired of letting old shame dictate her present. So she'd braided her hair back, put on a dress of deep blue that Faelan's people had provided, and walked into the chamber with her scars on display. The humans stared. She'd expected that. But Ambassador Chen had simply nodded approvingly and said, "It's good to meet you properly, Miss Rowe." The signing went smoothly. Each clause was read, translated, and affirmed. Signatures were added in ink and blood, old magic sealing new promises. And when Faelan and Ambassador Chen spoke the final oaths, Helena felt something shift in the air, a settling of power that made her skin prickle. It was done. Peace, however fragile, had been achieved. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Vampires and humans mingled with careful courtesy, and Helena found herself fielding compliments on her translation work and questions about her studies. No one mentioned her scars except to ask once if she was healing well from the attack. She was grateful for the discretion, but even more grateful for the realization that her face was no longer the first thing people saw. They saw her competence, her intelligence, her role in the historic treaty. The scars were simply part of her, not the whole story. Late in the evening, Faelan found her on one of the estate's balconies, looking out over the gardens. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. "You were magnificent today." He came to stand beside her close enough that she could feel the chill of his presence. "Every delegate is singing your praises. I just did my job." But she smiled, pleased despite herself. "You did far more than that." He turned to face her fully, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. "Helena, I have waited as you asked. The treaty is sealed, the church members are in custody, and we stand here in a moment of peace. So I am asking you now, with no pressure and no expectation, only hope." He took both her hands in his, cool fingers gentle around hers. "Will you accept the blood gift? Will you stand beside me not for a human lifetime, but for eternity? Will you become my queen, my partner, my love, for as long as the stars burn?" Helena looked up into his dark eyes and saw forever reflected there. She thought about what she would be giving up: sunlight, warmth, the easy comfort of a mortal life. She thought about what she would be gaining: time, power, and the love of a king who saw her scars as beautiful. "Yes," the word came out steady, sure. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose forever." The joy that lit Faelan's face was like sunrise, brilliant and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel the stillness where his heart no longer beat. "You will not regret this," he promised. "I will spend eternity ensuring you do not regret this." "I know." She pulled back just enough to kiss him, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was a kiss that promised everything, that sealed a bond deeper than any treaty. When they finally broke apart, Faelan said, "The turning is not something to undertake lightly. It will take 3 nights and it will be painful, but I will be with you every moment." "When?" Helena was surprised by her own eagerness. Whenever you wish. Tonight, tomorrow, next month. The choice is yours. Helena thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Tonight. I don't want to wait. Faelan's eyes darkened with emotion. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He kissed her again, deep and claiming, and then he led her down from the balcony, through the winding corridors, to his private chambers in the heart of the estate. The room was beautiful, all dark wood and crimson silk, with a bed large enough to get lost in. But Helena barely noticed the decor. Her attention was all on Faelan as he turned to face her. The first night, you will drink from me, he explained, his voice low and serious. My blood will begin the change. The second night, I will drink from you, lowering your blood volume until you are on the edge of death. The third night, you will drink from me again, and the transformation will complete. It is not easy, and there is always risk. But I will guard you through every moment. I trust you. Helena stepped closer, reaching up to cup his face. I love you, Faelan. I think I have since the moment you called me beautiful. I will call you beautiful every day for the rest of forever. He guided her to the bed, settling her among the pillows with infinite care. Are you ready? Yes. He rolled up his sleeve and with a swift motion bit into his own wrist. Blood welled, dark and rich, and he offered it to her. Drink. Helena hesitated for only a heartbeat before pressing her lips to the wound. The blood was cool and sweet, tasting of metal and night and something indefinably other. She drank and felt power slide down her throat like liquid electricity. The world began to sharpen around her. Colors grew more vivid, sounds more clear. She could hear Faelan's breathing, the rustle of fabric, the distant movement of vampires in other parts of the estate. When he finally pulled his wrist away, she was dizzy with sensation. Sleep now, Faelan murmured, laying her back against the pillows. Your body needs to begin processing the change. I will watch over you. Helena's eyes were already closing, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. The last thing she felt was Faelan's cool hand in hers, an anchor in the gathering dark. The second night was harder. Faelan fed from her slowly, carefully, taking just enough blood to bring her to the edge without pushing her over. Helena felt her strength drain away, felt her heartbeat grow sluggish and weak. But through it all, Faelan was there, holding her, whispering promises and endearments in languages she didn't know but somehow understood. Almost done, my love. You're so strong, so brave. I am in awe of you. By the end, she could barely move, could barely think. The world had narrowed to Faelan's voice and the feeling of his arms around her. The third night, he offered his wrist again, and this time when Helena drank, she felt her dying body seize the blood like a lifeline. Power flooded through her, rewriting her on a cellular level. Her heart stuttered, stopped, and then began beating again with a new rhythm, slower and stronger. Her senses exploded. She could hear everything, smell everything, feel every thread of the silk sheets beneath her. The world was sharp and bright and overwhelming, and she was hungry. Easy! Faelan's voice cut through the chaos. The bloodlust will be intense at first, but I have prepared for this. He offered her a crystal glass filled with blood, and Helena drank it down in desperate gulps. It was animal blood, she realized distantly, not human, but it was enough to take the edge off the hunger. Slowly, the world came back into focus. She looked down at her hands and saw they were pale now, alabaster white. Her fingernails looked sharper, stronger. Mirror, she said, and her voice was different too, clearer and richer. Faelan helped her to the full-length mirror in the corner of his chamber, and Helena stared at her reflection. She was still herself, but transformed. Her skin was white as snow, luminous. Her hair seemed darker by contrast, nearly black. Her eyes had shifted from hazel to a deep dark brown that was almost black, with a rim of silver around the iris. And her scars were still there, every line and ripple, unchanged by the transformation. They remain, Faelan said softly, standing behind her, his reflection meeting hers in the glass. The blood gift preserves who we are in the moment of turning. Your scars are part of you, part of your story. They remain because you are still Helena, simply more than you were. Helena touched her scarred cheek, feeling the familiar topology. But now it was smooth and cool, vampire pale. "I'm beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time in 15 years, she meant it. "You always were." Faelan wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Now you simply see what I have seen from the beginning." She turned in his arms, tilting her face up to his. "I love you, in this life and whatever comes after. In this life and all the lives beyond." He kissed her, and it was different now. No longer cool against warm, but two matched temperatures, two similar creatures finding perfect synchronicity. They had forever, Helena thought as she kissed him back. Forever to learn each other, to love each other, to build something new and beautiful from the ashes of old grief. It was more than enough. It was everything. The coronation took place a month later, once Helena had learned to control her new strength and speed, once she had mastered the basics of vampire etiquette and politics. Faelan's court gathered in the great hall beneath Silverheart, hundreds of vampires who had come from across the world to witness their king take a queen. Helena wore a gown of midnight blue, her white hair which had grown several inches in the month since her turning braided with silver thread. She wore no veil. Her scars were on full display, and she held her head high. Lucian performed the ceremony, speaking in old blood script that Helena now understood without translation. He bound her wrist to Faelan's with a crimson ribbon and spoke the ancient oaths of partnership and power. "Do you, Faelan Shadowmere, take this woman as your queen, your equal in all things, your partner in ruling and in life?" "I do," Faelan's voice rang through the hall, "for as long as the night endures." "Do you, Helena Rowe, take this man as your king, your equal in all things, your partner in ruling and in life?" "I do." Helena's voice was just as strong, "for as long as the stars burn." "Then by the power vested in me by blood and covenant, I declare you bound. King and queen of the night court, may your reign be long and your love longer." The court erupted in applause, and Faelan pulled Helena into a kiss that was both tender and claiming, a declaration before his entire people. When they broke apart, he whispered, "My queen, my love, my Helena." "My king," she whispered back, "my Faelan, my forever." The celebration lasted through the night. Vampires danced and drank and toasted the new queen, and Helena found herself welcomed with a warmth she hadn't expected. They saw her not as a human who had been turned, but as someone who had proven herself worthy through courage and sacrifice. Ambassador Chen had even sent a gift, a set of ancient texts on human-vampire relations, along with a note congratulating Helena on her new position and suggesting they work together to strengthen the treaty in the coming years. It was a new world, Helena thought, as she danced with Faelan in the center of the hall. A world where vampires and humans could coexist, where love could cross species lines, where a scarred woman could become a queen. Late in the celebration, Faelan pulled her aside to a quiet balcony overlooking the lightless garden. "Happy?" he asked, tucking a strand of white hair behind her ear. "More than I knew was possible." Helena leaned into him, marveling at how perfectly they fit together now. "Though I do have one question." "Ask." "The treaty signing. When I stood there without my veil in front of both delegations, was that part of your plan all along?" Faelan's lips curved in a smile. "I may have hoped that by the time of the signing you would no longer feel the need to hide, but the choice was always yours. I would have loved you veiled or unveiled, scarred or unmarked. Those are merely the details of your form. What I love is the strength beneath, the spirit that refused to be broken by fire or fear. You really are impossibly romantic for an 800-year-old vampire." "I have had a great deal of time to practice." He kissed her temple, her scarred cheek, her lips. "And now I have eternity to show you exactly how romantic I can be." Helena laughed and pulled him closer, kissing him under the stars that would witness countless more of their nights together. 6 months later, the covenant of coexistence was formally ratified by all major human governments and vampire courts. The treaty established permanent embassies, trade agreements, and joint task forces to combat threats like the Church of the Purifying Flame, which had been largely dismantled following the attack. Helena served as the primary liaison between the vampire courts and human governments. her unique position as both former human and current vampire queen, making her invaluable. She traveled between realms, negotiated disputes, and slowly built bridges between two species that had been enemies for millennia. Faelan ruled beside her, and together they transformed the Night Court into a beacon of the new age. They established schools where humans could learn about vampire culture, and vampires could understand human psychology. They funded research into synthetic blood that could reduce vampires' dependence on human donors. They opened their court to scholars and diplomats and anyone who came in good faith. And through it all, they loved each other with the fierce devotion of two people who had found their home in each other. 2 years after Helena's turning, on the anniversary of the day they'd met, Faelan took her back to the lightless garden where they'd first walked together. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to a new section of the garden she hadn't seen before. There, growing in the center of a circular plot, was a tree unlike any other in the garden. Its bark was dark, almost black, and its leaves glowed with a warm, golden light that looked almost like sunlight. "It's called a daylight remembrance," Faelan explained. "A rare hybrid that grows only in vampire gardens. The leaves produce light that mimics the sun, warm and bright. It cannot hurt us, but it can remind us of what we were." Helena reached out to touch a glowing leaf, and warmth spread through her fingers. Tears pricked at her eyes. "It's beautiful. I planted it the night you agreed to be turned. I wanted you to have a piece of the sun, even in the darkness." He moved behind her, his arms coming around her waist. "You gave up so much for me, for this life. I wanted to give you something back. You've given me everything." Helena turned in his arms, her scarred face tipped up to his perfect one. "You gave me love, acceptance, purpose. You saw me when I was hiding and called me beautiful. You gave me forever. What's a little sunlight compared to that? You deserve both, the darkness and the light." He cupped her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "You deserve everything, my Helena. I have everything. I have you." They kissed beneath the golden glow of the daylight remembrance, two immortals learning what it meant to love without end, to hold each other through the infinite stretch of years. And if sometimes Helena still felt the phantom weight of her veil, still remembered the shame that had defined her mortal life, she had only to look at Faelan to remember that shame was a lie others had taught her. She was beautiful, she was strong, she was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years became decades, and the world continued to change. The relationship between humans and vampires grew stronger, more integrated. Mixed communities sprang up where both species lived side by side. The fear and hatred that had once defined their relationship faded into history. The Church of the Purifying Flame became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when fear was allowed to fester into violence. And through it all, Helena and Faelan remained constant as the stars. They ruled justly, loved fiercely, and built a legacy that would endure for centuries. On their 50th anniversary, they stood together in the great hall of Silverheart, surrounded by their court and allies from both the human and vampire worlds. Ambassador Chen, now retired but still influential, had traveled to attend the celebration. 50 years, she said, raising a glass in toast. 50 years of peace, prosperity, and partnership between our peoples, and it all began with a treaty, a translator, and a king brave enough to see beauty where others saw only scars. The assembled crowd cheered, and Helena felt Faelan's hand squeeze hers. "To 50 more," he murmured in her ear, "and 50 after that, and all the years beyond, until the world itself grows old." "To forever," Helena agreed, and kissed him as the court celebrated around them. That night, alone in their chambers, Helena looked at herself in the mirror and thought about the woman she had been. The frightened girl hiding behind a veil, convinced that her scars made her unlovable, unworthy of being seen. That girl was gone, transformed not just by vampire blood, but by love, by choice, by the decision to stop hiding and start living. Helena touched her scars, still present after all these years, still visible on her pale vampire skin. They were part of her story, yes, but they were no longer the whole story. Now her story included a king who loved her, a court that respected her, a world she had helped change for the better. Now Her story included forever. What are you thinking? Faelan emerged from the bathroom, his white hair loose around his shoulders. I'm thinking about how lucky I am. Helena turned to face him, smiling. How a translator job turned into a coronation, how shame turned into strength, how a veil became unnecessary because someone saw me and called me beautiful. You are beautiful. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Every day, every year, every century, you grow more beautiful to me. Not despite your scars, but because of everything they represent, your survival, your strength, your refusal to let fire define you. I love you. Helena wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down for a kiss. I will love you for all the years we have, for all the nights ahead, for as long as existence allows. And I will love you just as long. Faelan lifted her easily, carrying her to their bed. My queen, my Helena, my forever love. They had faced fire and fear, hatred and violence. They had survived attacks and treaties, politics and pain, and through it all, they had chosen each other again and again. Now they had forever to continue that choice. And in the lightless garden, the daylight remembrance tree glowed with warm golden light, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there could be warmth, beauty, and love. Helena had hidden her face behind a veil of shame, believing that her scars made her unworthy of love, of happiness, of being truly seen. But Faelan had lifted that veil and called her beautiful. And in doing so, he had given her something far more precious than immortality. He had given her back herself. And together, they would spend eternity proving that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that shame could be transformed into strength, and that beauty lived not in perfection, but in the courage to be seen, scars and all. This was their story. A translator and a king, a mortal woman and an immortal vampire, two scarred souls finding healing in each other. And it was a story that would never end, because some loves are strong enough to last forever, and theirs was one of them.